This is Dr. Gatti Hilton. Before we begin today's episode, I want to offer a brief content note. This conversation includes discussion of childhood abuse in various forms, including emotional, physical, sexual, and spiritual harm. It also includes discussion of sexual assault later in adulthood. If these topics are sensitive or activating for you, please consider whether or not this is the right time to listen. You're always welcome to pause, step away, or come back when you feel ready. This episode is not shared to shock or sensationalize. It's shared to honor a story of courage, survival, and truth telling. Today, I'm joined by my sister, Jeannie. In this first part of our conversation, she walks us through her upbringing, growing up in a close knit family, stepping into the role of a caretaker early on, experiencing abuse by our father, and the difficult decision to report him. She talks about fractured loyalty, working at the beach during formative years, writing her story, navigating dating, surviving sexual assault, and the turning point that came when she met her husband. This is a story about silence, about breaking that silence, and about what it costs to tell the truth. Let's begin. This is Dr. Gatti Hilton here with another episode of On the Path. Here with me, I have the real life version, at least for me, of Mother Teresa, my elder sister, Jeannie. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, brother.
I got to say that I'm surprised how easy it's been to get my family members to join me on this.
It says a lot about them, their humility.
I guess so. I thought there would be a lot of more fighting and, avoiding, but honestly, you guys are lining up. You guys got your ticket. So I want to just kind of do what I normally do, which is kind of go back and have you introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, and just kind of get a solid background of who we're talking to. So I guess tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. I am the oldest sister. My name is Jeannie Ellen Robina, and I grew up in Montreal, Canada, and I was one of four children, and I was the oldest. So I took on a role of care for everybody. I consider myself part of a very close knit family. I got married at a young age. I had six children of my own, and I was both a homeschooler, mother and wife, as well as a Christian school teacher.
A lot of things.
I also took on the role of missionary and did some international work as well.
So you grew up in Montreal.
Yes.
What did that look like? From what age to what age?
So I spent about 15 years in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. What did that look like? I was part of a small province. I always tell people it's equivalent to like Beauty and the Beast and Belle. And it was kind of very beautiful, very cold, and there was a lot of wonder. I actually enjoyed the outdoors and enjoyed snow. So I actually learned a lot of my traits, my values, the pledge of Canada. And I actually enjoyed school very much. Their educational system was very excellent. And they were some of the best memories in my years.
You said that you tended to take on the caretaker role. Was there a lot of that growing up?
Yes, there was a lot of that. In some aspects, I kind of took that on quite young because I was kind of left on my own at a very young age. So yes. And I quickly had a sibling like you did, Jack. My sister was 18 months younger than me. So I immediately also had a sibling, and she was my favorite hobby. And I was never really alone because I had my little sister with me all the time.
So when you talk about growing up in Montreal, I mean, I know kind of your background. There wasn't just Montreal. You lived in different parts of Canada.
It was mainly Montreal and some parts of Ontario as well, and Toronto, but never really, I think, escaping like other than those two provinces.
Did you like a specific place more?
I liked Ontario more so, just because there I could kind of like speak my native language of English. As in Montreal, I grew up kind of never speaking my own language. I grew up in an Italian home, so I spoke Italian in that home. I had to go to school, and we learned to learn French in school. And then I had my father's side of the family, and they mainly spoke English and some Gaelic. So I had to also kind of acclimate to that. So I kind of grew up with this kind of joke of like, why can I never speak my own language, God? But it's part of who I am. So
What was growing up like for you?
I often think about this. I think that it was often very whimsical, very wonderful. In the context, I was part of a very big family. I was part of a very big famous family early on. And in a lot of ways, I was actually, strangely enough, as uncomfortable as I am right now, I was actually around the camera a lot, around the press a lot, and the public eye a lot. But in some aspects, because of that, I was kind of without parents. I stayed often with babysitters and nannies or my grandparents, like either one set of grandparents or the other set of grandparents, or I was with my sibling only at home. So my parents did travel often, and oftentimes they were kind of distant people that were busy with their lives in my father's boxing career.
What was it like to grow up with a boxing family?
It was kind of strange because I was, and let me just say, this is like the first 7 years of my life, just to be fair. If I place the first 7 years of my life, I would say that it was kind of unreal. It was definitely, I knew I was different. I knew that my life was different than most children. I felt privileged. I had a lot of uncles on each side. My mother is a family of six, and my father comes from a family of six. And in some aspects, I was greatly spoiled by all of my uncles and my aunties. So I felt very loved, very treasured and cherished, and often very spoiled by both sides of the family. And I kind of grew up, in just a very fairy tale, whimsical kind of way.
And you said for the first 7 years, what happened afterwards?
After the first 7 years, I'd say that unfortunately more violence started happening from my father towards my mother. They would argue, but I think after the 7 years, his career started changing. I think he suffered some broken bones. He had lost his brother, which means I had lost an uncle, and a lot of suffering and turmoil had started to begin. And my father was more and more home, and he was no longer absent from the home. And I would only see him with gifts and visitations. It was more now that he was present in the home, and now my mother was beginning to start work outside of the home. And I just saw a lot of more kind of violence and turmoil against my mother, which made the home very uneasy. My father also had begun drinking and often drinking. And so we started to avoid my father in some aspects and kind of like hiding and not being around him so much.
So that came after the 7 years, or was there always violence?
I'd say that came more so afterwards, and we started to move a lot. And so I started to move from school to home to home. And that was starting to make it difficult as well because I was always the new student and I had literally been to maybe 10 different elementary schools by that time. And so it was very difficult picking up and moving on, moving on, which I started to grow apathetic. And also I started to feel like less attached to my friends, I guess, and my family aspects too.
Did you see your family a lot after the 7 years?
I did more so, but less of my extended family. I saw less of my grandparents. I saw less of my uncles that I adored and, were always, around me. I saw more of my father, and that became a lot more difficult to deal with.
With our mom working, what was that like to not unfortunately have a mom consistently at home?
I always considered my mother was always consistently at home because my mother had a great strength that even though she was perhaps working one or two jobs at a time, her presence was always greatly missed, or she always did seem present because she was a very strong role model. So our meals would come from our mother, the cleaning would come from our mother, and her love was always there regardless. I never felt that she was absent, but there were times that I just wish she was not working.
I bet she would have wanted the same.
Yes.
Yeah. So you spent year up until 15 in Montreal, you said.
Yes. It wasn't always consistently in Montreal, but it was about 15 that I would say that I remained Canadian to some extent.
So you saw less and less peers. Did you go to school consistently?
It was very spotty attendance. I always loved school. I always loved thriving at school as best as I could. But sometimes my father did forbid us from attending school, which I felt was very traumatizing. I wanted to attend school, and at school there was a consistency. There were teachers who were adults that had organization and systems that I felt were just very enlightening. And they were always very kind and helpful. And at the same time, I felt them to be very industrious. I always felt they looked at me in ways that I was not looked at home, in the sense that they always saw something I never saw in myself. So they helped me carry on and to kind of believe in myself and to continue wanting to study.
Was keeping you home, away because they couldn't keep up with bringing you to school, or was there kind of like a lack of importance of putting your kid to school?
I think it was a little bit of both. One was sometimes nobody was there to take us to school because my mother was working and my father was either in bed, hungover, or sometimes he would purposely say that, no, the girls are not going to school today. So I felt it was a control, kind of a power and control thing. And my mother never really could argue against that.
Did
But my mother did try. My mother did try.
you make a lot of friends at school that would have noticed that you weren't there?
I did always make a lot of friends. I was quite popular and I was very athletic as well. And I really enjoyed it. But my friends, I would say that they did notice I was not there, but I never really kept in touch like via phone or anything like that with them. So there was no, it was not like it is today. Like, you have phones and every minute of your life was recorded.
When school was such a safe haven or a relief, not being able to go to school, how did you cope with that?
I would pray. I was taught prayer early on, and I would pray and I would just kind of cling on to my little sister, and my little sister and I kind of clung to each other. And we would often play despite the day, or we would actually pretend and role play school at home
So you had your sister.
always.
Talk about that dynamic between you and your sister.
So we're not twins. You're married to a twin, but we've always felt like we were like twins, and always been very close. And the dynamic was she was kind of like my companion, and so I felt like I was there, always there to protect her, but she was always there to kind of I felt protect me as well. And we just were always able to slip into childhood, innocence and play. We grew up in the outdoors, and we always enjoyed playing outside and always escaping the adult world.
Was there a lot of violence towards you guys?
Early on, it was not a lot of violence, but I felt sometimes the way our father did discipline us was quite aggressive. He was a very aggressive person, as his career was prize fighting. And so, yes, sometimes the discipline was quite aggressive for little girls, especially. We were often beat with a belt. Sometimes our hair was pulled. He aggressively moved us like from room to room. Sometimes we were placed in closets. It just sometimes there was biting and cruel games. But as we got older, our father started to treat us the way he treated our mother. And he started to be more and more violent towards us, often driven by jealousy from our peers from school. When I started getting to the age of adolescence, where puberty was setting in, he was often very jealous of boys at school, and he became increasingly more jealous and more aggressive, where we would get backhands and slapped, and often with bruises that we would not go to school at that point to not go to school with bruises.
And you had your sister at this point to kind of do life with.
Yes.
How did you guys talk about that, cope with that? Was it even something you discussed?
I think we didn't have to discuss it much. There was always just kind of a look, a hug. She'd always say, "Are you okay, Jeannie? Are you okay?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I'm okay." And I'd say, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'm okay." So it was kind of like we were okay because we had each other and we were still alive and living, but it was getting hard to live in these conditions. And we did kind of feel that, there was really nobody there to protect us, but we had each other.
Now, I mean, without having to overly, expose so much, but you've experienced and seen the worst of the worst that a lot of people couldn't even imagine. Now you have the added responsibilities of two younger brothers.
Yes.
I mean, we're adorable and all, but talk about now. You said I mean, it's not just you and your sister at this point. Now you have little kids that you're at times watching over.
So I have to say this because I think if I don't say this, then people won't really understand just how I grew up. Like my livelihood was my favorite game. My favorite game was to have a bunch of baby dolls and turn them all on at the same time and have them cry and then go and pick them up and turn off the crying. And that was like my favorite game to play. And so when my mother finally told us that she was expecting a child, to us, that was greater than any Christmas present. And so we just really enjoyed and loved having little siblings around. So for us, it was part of play and it was also part of, we felt like we were blessed. And we just loved these little boys running around, especially that they were boys. They had blue clothes and we never saw anything like it. And hence we never saw it as work.
Did things get better when you had brothers, or did it get worse still?
It got worse, unfortunately, in their lives. We still had some nannies around, to help out, but it was more work for us. And I felt my mother was a lot more stressed raising us. She was a lot more stressed around us. And sometimes we were there to provide relief to our mother by taking care of our brothers. So I felt that it was stressful for my mother. But we all enjoyed being part of this big sibling group and we loved our mother. We would just increasingly did not like our father as much because it seemed that wherever he was, when he was close to us, he was always going to provide harm either indirectly or directly.
Do you care to talk about that indirectly?
The indirectly was lack of resources. He never, even though he was well, he would not pick up his career again as a boxer. He tried to pick up certain jobs, but just did not seem successful. He was not educated, anywhere near as educated as my mother was, and that's not a lot of education. So it just all the burden fell on my mother, and so much expectation was on my mother, and we would feel very upset that he was placing that expectation on our mother, and we felt that there was an injustice there. So as she picked up yet another job, 2 and 3 jobs, and she was always inventing herself, like, she was always trying to educate herself, by working for Bell Canada and practicing, being a voice operator. She just was very innovative and very inspirational, but we just felt like as she inspired and illuminated, our father just seemed less and less effective or valid in our life. But when he was, it was only just to take from us. So he took a lot from us indirectly, and all of my mother's resources that she did accumulate for money, he would take. So he would take everything from us. He would take money from us. It was always about taking it for his needs, and his needs were often about himself. And it was about, going out and partying with his friends. And my mother was just left with the burden of being the parent. As time went on and progressed, he became more violent and jealous towards us, especially me. One time he had driven our mother out of the house because of the violence that he had inflicted on her. And it was the first time she ever left us alone. That was just devastating for me because even though we were all going through this together, these trials together, my mother never left. She was unfortunately taking all of the beatings, and she was taking the affliction for us and protecting us. But this one time that he had inflicted her so much, she actually had left the house and ran away. And I was devastated. I was waiting for her to return, and she had not returned. So I did not sleep really well that night, but my father woke me up. And when he woke me up, he was asking me for sexual favors. And then I was even more devastated, obviously, because he kept requesting my virginity. And that was just very devastating because I thought it was almost like, this can't be happening. This just cannot be happening. And I expected my mother to return, but she had not. And I fought my father off all night, trying to prevent him from attacking me and raping me. At that time, I was about 13 years old.
Did you know what was happening?
I did not know what was happening really, and I really did not understand what he was asking, but I did understand that it was not right. And I did understand that he had waited for the opportunity for my mother to leave the house, or he had actually caused her to leave the house on purpose for this very request.
Now, I mean, just to kind of be forthcoming a little bit, like this isn't your first encounter, I'm assuming anyway, of sexualization. Like he's been a very perverse type of person.
We've always grown up with pornography in some ways, indirect or directly. He's had friends come to the house. I remember showering around I'd say maybe 11 years old. And I remember him coming into my shower or peeking into my shower, or coming into my bathroom, bringing his friends with him into my bathroom and looking at me in the shower. So, in some aspects, there was a grooming process. I remember him asking questions like, hey, do you have a boyfriend? Do you want to kiss boys? That would never happen because he was so strict that if we even mentioned a boy, it would be devastating. But then he would kind of be like, oh no, it's all okay, or it will be okay, eventually, but he has to show me how, to be ready for a boyfriend. So in some aspects, he would say, we could practice kissing, you're getting a really nice body. And so he would always be making these, alluded comments towards me.
And at that time, like how did you cope with that? Like those thoughts?
Hate, feelings, disgust. And then going to school almost felt dangerous. Like I never knew what I was going to come home to, like what he was going to say next, or if he was spying on me. And sometimes he was spying on me at school, or he would pick me up early from school.
You said hate towards him or hate towards self?
I would say both. I think I already had feelings of resentment against him because of the way he treated us and treated my mother. And I always felt what he had inflicted on my mother was worse than what he was inflicting on me. But I started to hate myself as well because as I was developing, I did not want to develop in a way that would show anything to him outerly that he would want to then come and try to attack me.
When did things change for you?
Things didn't get better. My mother did end up returning the next day. And I remember my mother telling me that, are you okay? You don't look like you're okay. And I would just tell her I was okay. And for a period of 2 years, I think after that, it was just survival. And then I had later learned through my sister and through our companionship that he was also doing the same things to my sister. So when my sister and I were now again back in this world of companionship and nobody, the adult world and then our world, we just felt like we were surviving at that point. We didn't want to hurt our mother. We also felt that he was hitting her less. And I think in some aspects, he was showing us that if we gave him what he wanted, he would actually hurt my mother less. And so some aspects we felt that was a fair sacrifice, that he would stop beating our mother, but that he would, unfortunately, we would have to give services so he would not, hurt my mother or hurt my brothers. We became very protective, I think, of our brothers and of our mother and of each other. But at the same time, we just didn't know how to cope. Um, we ended up coming to the States because then he did pick up a boxing contract, and he was even becoming more successful and more ambitious with his boxing because, he's, I guess, in his mind, his life was going great with the abuse of his daughters. So I think that as time went on and we came to the States, we started to see a different life than we had known in Canada. Things in the States was especially in Miami, Florida, was very bright and sunny. And it was something like in our dreams and storybooks that we had never even seen before, living in Canada in the pile of snow, kind of like what you're going through right now. It was an Arctic blast for most of our lives. But at that time, it was kind of like palm trees. It was actually very therapeutic. So around us, we felt a sense of therapy living in Florida. And we felt like maybe we were moving forward. But unfortunately, the abuse just got worse. And he did finally end up taking our virginity. And so it just got worse. And coping with that was very difficult. And hiding that from our mother was very difficult. So what ended up happening is he actually had harmed my sister. And my sister had told me. And I think she even had like bruises on her body. At that point, she told me that she was gonna run away, and I could not imagine my life without her. So when she said she was gonna run away just because of my father, and at that moment, he was not with us in Florida, he happened to have had to return to Canada, I felt that that was our moment to escape, but I wasn't gonna let her run away because and I wouldn't wanna run away and hurt my mother because I don't feel my mother deserved that from us because, us not telling her why we'd run away would probably devastate her. I just told my sister, "You don't have to run away." And I remember my sister telling me, "Yes, I do. I have to run away. He's not going to stop. He's going to keep hurting us." And I just said to her, I said, "You don't have to run away, Anna, because we're going to go tell our mom." And my sister just looked at me because that was never really a thought that had come into our mind before. But for whatever reason, I guess God gave us that strength of being able to say something because he wasn't in that space with us. And he did a lot of controlling and isolating. He tried to control my mother and control us and keep us away from each other, even in space. Like he would say, "Oh, she's working and no, you have to go do that." Like she would never really allow us to really ever be alone together. So for the first time, we were just, in this space of time where we had just the siblings and my mom and life with just us was good. I mean, finally that whatever that was, that horrible presence was not there with us. And so I just said, "We're going to tell mommy." And my sister just looked at me and she thought, like, kind of like, "Oh, yeah, I dare you," kind of thing. And I remember just saying, "Stay right here. Promise me you're not going to run away." Because at that time she was packing her bags in the hotel. And I was working with my mother in a restaurant in Sunny Isle Beach, Florida. And I remember going to my mom and I had just showed up late at night. We were supposed to stay in the hotel. I was not supposed to be there at that time. And so I had walked down the street in Sunny Isle Beach by myself. And I just said, "I'm here to help you, mom." And she kind of looked at me like, "You're not supposed to be here." And I just started thinking, "Can I help you so we can leave earlier?" And I think she just saw a look in my face and she says, "Okay, sure." She's like, "Okay, we'll go. Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, things are good. But I had a conversation with dad and I want to tell you about it." And so I just helped her. And then for whatever reason, she was able to get off early and we returned back to the hotel. And I just said to her, I sat her down with my sister and I just said, "Mom, we want to tell you something. And I think we've been trying to tell you, but we just didn't know how to. And I want to tell you that daddy has been doing dirty things to us and we just didn't know how to tell you. But Anna's trying to run away and I don't want her to run away because I think that you should know. I don't think you ever knew. And I just want you to know that this is what happened and that we're not virgins anymore." Because we were raised with Christian values and virginity was a big thing. Waiting for marriage, having sex and waiting for marriage was a big deal for us as well. And so we had to like clearly tell our mother that we're not virgins anymore. And it's because of daddy. It's not because of things that we were doing. And of course, my mother was devastated. I think we had taken the wind out of her that evening. I don't really remember very much from that. I always tell people that I just remember at that point, she never questioned us. She didn't doubt us. But we had just kind of like stayed together and we wept together and we had fallen asleep. And I think I tell people that that's like the best sleep we've ever had in years because our father would wake us up at night and we wouldn't get very good sleep. And so my mother just said to us the next day, "I've been thinking about you girls and I've been thinking about what you told me." And she says, "You guys were sleeping like little babies, like little lambs. And I wanted to tell you something. I hope you're going to accept this, but we can't just carry on our lives as normal, even though dad's not here with us. We're going to have to go to the police." And that was very scary because police have come to our door before, but because of who my father was and his fame and his affiliation, the police have never seemed to be effective for us. And like my mother never called the police when she was being beaten and it never crossed our mind. Some teachers did call Department of Child Services, but it seemed ineffective as well. So for her to say that was kind of like, where's that going to get us? And she's like, "We're in the US now. And because we're in the US now, people don't know who he is like they did in Canada. And so we're going to go to the police because if we don't go to the police, he's never going to leave us alone." And so when she told us that, we knew that she was right because he was like a stalker. He wouldn't leave us alone. And we knew that he was never going to leave us alone unless we went to the police. So we listened to our mother and Our mother walked us down to the Sunny Isle Police Department that same day. And surprisingly, we maybe have spent 5 to 10 minutes max with the police officer, the detective. I still remember his name to this day. He just looked like a hero to me. And he just believed our story right away. And he said, "This is not going to happen anymore. And we're going to handle this. You don't have to live that way anymore. And you don't have to tell us anymore of what's happened. We believe you." And I remember just my mother telling me that. I said, "Mom, are you okay?" And she just told us that I just keep thinking about you in that little dress when you were about 6 months old with little curly hair and a little tiger, and I just keep thinking about you, and I just can't imagine how he could have done this to our little girls. And I feel like at that point from there, it was like almost like a restoration, reunification, and reconciling of us back to our mother, and our mother was able to then maybe parent us again as we'd all been in survival mode for so long.
When you tell that story, what comes up for you?
From the memory of it, it's very distant, unfortunately and fortunately, but I just remember a hero, my mother being a hero at that moment. I remember my sister still being with us and that she didn't run away and that there was a way for us that when you think that there is no way in life, that there was a way at that point, that the police officers were able to help us, that there was justice, even though nothing had been carried out just yet. Just the validation of, we believe you, this is going to stop, this has to stop. To me, at that point, it really did stop. And a lot of things from the past and from what had happened had stopped. And so for me, it's just you kind of look at that girl, that little girl once upon a time that lived inside me that had been through that, but at the same time, she had a good, good things happened after that.
You said that you couldn't tell your mom. You and your sister were holding on to this. That's a lot of pressure.
Yes,
I'd imagine you felt like you were carrying the world.
that's exactly how we felt. I remember that there was a time that we would actually sneak away in the morning when our parents were sleeping, and we would actually go to a coffee shop. And I don't remember if we had money to go and buy coffee at that point, but we were literally like tormented, and we would just talk to each other about, was he in your room last night? Because I actually got to sleep some, and she would say, no, he was in my room, or I would say, no, he was in my room, and we would just kind of hold each other and just say like, we're going to make it. We're going to make it through this. Those were probably the hardest times. And it was even harder. I always tell people it's always harder to hear that kind of pain and violence when it's inflicted on others, sometimes more than yourself, because you're disassociating and you're just kind of grinning and bearing it. But when you hear it again, it's almost like it's the the confirmation that it did happen to you. And on top of that, it's going to hurt you more because it's your little sister. And then you don't remember this, Jackie, but he was starting to also go into your rooms. And our worst fear was that he was going to do the same thing to the boys. And we truly believed from the bottom of our hearts that he was going to hurt the boys. And so we knew we had to fight against it.
I mean, in some regard, there are, beginnings and grooming that goes into that did happen, right? Even with being provocative and, the things that we were exposed to, it is kind of the initial aspect of sexual abuse. So now that we'll fast forward a little bit for you. You're in Florida. Whatever happened to him. He can't come to Florida. How did you, in a foreign country, somebody who said to me earlier, you're always surrounded by family, not having family.
So we did inform the family, and my mother had informed the family, his side of the family more specifically, because her side of the family always knew that he was pretty rotten. I think they had tried in different capacities to try to get her to leave, but always respecting boundaries. But she did inform his family because I think to some extent she did believe that his family believed in right and wrong, and they were informed and they did believe us. But in some aspects, eventually, like, I guess a side has to be picked. So, what happened afterwards is that the detective tried to reinforce the borders to make sure that when he actually touched foot in the United States, that he would immediately be arrested based on what he had done to us, which was full rape on a minor, both minors in a hotel. And so what had happened is the family unfortunately informed him. And because he was informed, he did not come into the United States. He did call us, as boldly as that is, and he was trying to be really nice and say, "Oh, I heard this. Is this true that somebody's accusing me of abusing you guys?" And we said, "Yes, it was us. We are the ones that went to the police and we told the police everything that you have done to us." And we told him that on the phone while my mother was present. And he kind of just went very quiet. And we could actually, for the first time, feel the cowardice in his voice and realized this big, strong monster was a big coward and a disgusting human being.
Was he trying to gaslight you and try to make it seem that you were remembering everything wrong?
He was not, I think he was in a sense, but he's always gaslighted us. That was almost a very normal thing. I think in some aspects, he was, I think, in shock. So it was more kind of like, very docile, very sweet. I wouldn't consider it gaslighting at that point, but he was trying to get information or answers from us. And I guess we did not hold back at that point because we felt validated and strengthened. But I was going to tell you is that he had called me maybe the couple of nights before I had told my mother drunk, and he was telling me how, he was always replaying in his mind over and over again what he had taken from me, which was my virginity. And that was the only thing that, that he got off, from. And so at that point, like we had had enough. So that I think in some aspects, because of the extent of the abuse at that point, it didn't matter even if he was gaslighting me because we had literally felt like we are not going back.
Now, did the sexual abuse last for years?
Yes, it lasted for years. I think if I now I remember that we say it's 4 years because I was about 16. And so that means it would have happened when like 12 years old. 12 years old, but really, if you look back in the years, it really happened longer than that. I think it might have started at 9 years old when I started developing breasts and him taking pictures and coming into the shower. And if you look even further than that with all the pornography around and him just talking about our bodies when we were doing gymnastics and just the anatomy and telling us to do the splits, it probably happened like even longer.
This is a weird question to ask, but was there ever aspects of your father that was actual like a father?
Yes. So I'm glad that you asked me that question because as I'm going back and trying telling you, like those first 7 years, I actually think I don't know who I told this to. I think maybe it was my son, my oldest son. The first 7 years, I had a very kind, loving father who was a celebrity and he was like a superhero. And he is the same father who had brought me to hospital visits and he would visit the handicap. He went to the handicap Olympics and had me attend the Olympics and he would sign autographs. He would visit sick children. We would do visitations in the hospital. And he was just always available for his fans. And I remember once upon a time that he was just an amazing father. And he was even a star even to us, even to me, especially because I was the oldest child. Whenever he was home, it was a blessing and a delight. And it was always exciting. So, yes, I do remember the first 7 years with being with an amazing father figure.
So what do you think changed?
Probably drinking and probably the lack of success in his career. Um, and as well as, I guess, the death of his brother. And from what I understand, the heavy abuse from his own personal life. I do believe that he was abused heavily. I believe he was trafficked for money, unfortunately, and sold for money in the boxing industry. He was involved, his parents, um, had allowed people and managers to come in, um, members of the mafia to come in and basically manage him, unfortunately. And there was a price to pay. So we paid it ultimately. And what's amazing, and I always think this is part of the story, is that we didn't just stop with telling the police. And even though he didn't come to the United States to be prosecuted because he had committed crimes also in Canada against us, we ended up having to go to Canada for a second testimony with police. But we did our anatomy. We went to the Jackson Rape Center here in Florida and they had taken our physical exams where it did show that that we had never had sexual contact with anybody and that we definitely had effects of rape on our body. And so we were able to carry that evidence down to Canada and fully prosecute him in Canada. And then we ended up going to court and he ended up serving 7 years in prison. I was about 17 at that time.
Was that like a stamp done healed? Or what was healing like after that was done?
That was justice and protection, mainly protection for my family, for my mother and my sister and my brothers. And it was just to keep the monster at bay and also for us to continue walking forward. I later wrote a book I co authored with my sister. And that also was a part of justice because he'd only served 7 years because it was incest, and that's the laws in Canada. They serve less if it's incest. He served 7 years, but I thought, what happens when he get out? Like I was always constantly, thinking that thought, what happens when he gets out? What happens? He's going to find a way. He's going to get us. He's going to find a way. And so the only thing I could think about is how do I prevent him from hurting others? Because the way that he had hurt us, I know he will go on to hurt others, especially children and women. And so we wrote a book just giving our testimony. And he did end up contacting me on Facebook, telling me that what we had done through the book was actually more damaging than him serving the 7-year sentence. And so I no longer am on Facebook for that reason. But I would say that that actually gave me a sense of peace that even though he served 7 years, because of the damage to his reputation, that's what he was more concerned about. He's never apologized to us and he's never admitted to what he's done, but he has apologized to me personally about what he's done to my mother.
So now you're in Florida. I mean, I remember talking to the detective as well back in the day. I can't remember a timeline of like, did we instantly go down to Florida and then start life? You know, it's kind of a blur. But now
Hmm.
you're in Florida. You're now, and I do remember you and Anna you used to like work next door when we were in the motel at that Best Western or something like that with mom. Was that life like you were always working?
Yes. So working was actually fun and it was a way because we weren't really allowed out of the hotel or the house. There came a time when he just completely took us out of school and we were just at home, at his beck and call. So going to work was kind of like going to school. It was a way to go out and see people. Even at that point, I had some fear, anxiety, and I did not want to see people. I worked multiple jobs as a dishwasher, as a busboy, and then finally as a waitress, and then as a restaurant manager, aiding my mother. But I enjoyed it a lot. And at this point, I had a lot of peace about it because it was just us working to support each other. And all of the money, as little as it was enough to give us a pretty viable life. Despite not being, famous people and with extravagant careers, just a little was much. And so was the freedom.
You're with your mom, you're with your siblings. I mean, you're technically undocumented, you know, so you didn't really get a lot of resources. You know, what was it like laying low, working with your mom, raising siblings at 16?
So it it was empowering and it was difficult because like you said, we weren't documented. But we worked for a whole line of Canadian businesses that knew who we were and knew what we had been through and they were like angels. They had like were just covering us and protecting us. So we felt protected, we felt loved, and we felt just the assurance that everything would be okay.
Did you feel completely safe? I mean, there were a lot of people in and out of our lives that I felt were like moles. They were there, they kind of like came around, they remembered the family, but then they kind of fed information to, you know, our father. You know, did you ever feel safe knowing that he kinda knew where you were at?
There was always a sense that he can come get us again, even from prison, because of reputation and because of who he was and who he was affiliated with. But it didn't bother me. Once I saw that he was a coward and that, I was afraid of a fake person pretty much, I feel like I was emboldened with a faith and as well as a strength that did not come from myself, that was greater for myself, that only God could have given me. And so I did not feel afraid anymore. I felt that if you could do that, if you could speak out, you can do anything. If you can work as a family and you can, have a mom and siblings and be a family, it's greater than what more people it's greater than what most people have. Now I went from a girl who had almost nothing to a girl that had almost everything because I had safety, security, love, and peace. Yes. And then married. I went to court to put him in prison at 17 and I ended up getting married at 18 to my neighbor.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how did that happen?
So we eventually accumulated so much money that we went from a hotel to a condo and from a condo to a house. And so this was a very big move, a monumental move for us to really have that life like a family and that white picket fence. And things were just awesome. And it ended up being that I signed a lease alongside my mother to the landlord of that house. And I actually lied on the application and said that I was 19 instead of 16. I was 16 going on 17. But I said I was 19 because I didn't know the laws in the US and I had lied about so many other things at that point just to stay afloat, like being able to work in the States and everything. So I said I was 19 so that, nobody would come and check on us because I was actually helping my mother, support my mother. And so the man that ended up that was the landlord was also our neighbor. And this man also ended up becoming my husband.
How did you meet?
So I signed the lease and lied, and he still has that lease. And he would come around a lot, and he would kind of just check on us. I don't know if it's because we were 4 kids. He tells me it was because we were 4 kids, and he just finished renovating that place. That he was afraid of what the children would do to that property, which was going to eventually be his parents' retirement home. But he would come over a lot and he was kind of on his own a lot. He lived alone. He was single. And I think that I just grew a growing trust in him and a faith in him. And I just saw that he was like the most kind, industrious person I've ever met. And he was always around to help my family, no matter what it was, even if it was being late for rent. So eventually, I come to fall in love with him, even though he was 14 and a half years older than me.
I was gonna say, how did that land
Yes.
with your mom?
She was not happy. She said that I would be very unhappy with this older man and that I had just started my life and I should think about living my life, and now that I wasn't living this life in a healthy way, that, I didn't have to leave the home. And she actually essentially told me that she was sad with the thought that I would be leaving the home so young because she felt that she never had a chance to raise me, that her husband was always taking me away from her, or other family members were always taking me away from her, and that if I was to leave and get married at 18, that she would feel very sad because just she had just gained me and now she was trying to, contribute towards my healing. And so she was afraid for me.
You had one real relationship between, I mean, really in your life before Freddie, your husband. How is it like dating really kind of for the first time and then getting in, like, especially after something so traumatic that you've been through?
That's actually a great question. I'm glad that you asked that because my husband actually also asked me the same question. And he was actually grateful that I did have a boyfriend before I dated Freddie. So, in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have dated after all this trauma and abuse because what I didn't tell you is that I actually went through a great deal of anxiety and depression. I had PTSD. I had horrible nightmares constantly. I cut my hair really short to look like a boy and not look like a girl. I dressed myself in baggy clothing. I was really afraid of men. I was really afraid of people in general. I started to develop horrible anxiety. It was about 16 years old, and I just was just so set on trying to survive the years after the abuse because, like you said, I always thought he'd come and get us, and I just, I guess I kind of put my life on hold. And then when the problem was out of my life, then all of a sudden my mind started to replay everything over again. So all of the memories that I had stuffed inside and just survived now were actually replaying themselves again and again. And then I think the processing, the realization of what he had done to me is the part that I had a hard time coping with. So I had a hard time with food. Sometimes I just could not eat. Sometimes it was very difficult for me to cope and breathe. And there came a time that I just could not leave the house because remember, there was a time I told you that we were not allowed to leave the house. And so I couldn't leave the room. And my mother would say, "Come on, we're going to go to the gym today and we're going to do some exercising." And I would say, "I can't leave the door." And she would say, "You have to leave the door." And I would say, "I can't. There's something in front of the door. I can't leave. It's just, I don't have the strength to walk out of this room." And my mother, I remember, just reached in and I looked at like she kind of put her hand through a portal and she grabbed my hand and she says, "Let's go." And she just pulled me out. And my mother would take me to the gym every single day, sometimes twice a day, to get out and try to work through this stress that I was having or this distress I was having. And I started to feel better and I started to feel a healing. There came a point where I actually felt that I was not really able to do any kind of civil duty, that I actually had that the only career I could ever fathom because this question of like at that point I had to finish my high school diploma. And I was trying to recoup my education still because I was had that I got to get educated. I got to finish my education because it was so forbidden, in this culture I was in previously. That I thought, okay, if I'm going to be anything, I'm probably going to be a soldier. I'm probably going to join the Navy. And I thought, even if it's the Canadian Navy, I'm going to join the Navy because I don't see myself suited for anything. Definitely not going to get married. Definitely not going to have children. And so I just felt like I did not want to ruin anyone's life. I didn't want to ruin my life further. And so I really was set on working out to get ready for the Navy. So in that process of working out, I did meet somebody in the gym and it ended up not being a very good thing. It was too soon. I fell for a wolf in sheep's clothing and I was not prepared for a relationship and I thought that I was. And for me, my biggest thing was it's my choice. It's my choice. So I'm going to finally, meet a boy and finally going to have this relationship that all girls want to have. They want to have a boyfriend and one day get married. I didn't want to get married, but I did want to see what it was like to have a boyfriend. And I ended up getting raped again, actually. So it was very difficult for me to process that and tell my mother that.
How did that conversation go?
I don't think I told my mother directly, but I kind of alluded to it. For whatever reason, my mother was always very supportive. Putting me in prison didn't enter my mind because I felt that it was my fault. I was naive. That's one of the biggest things I think, like, how naive you are as a young girl. And especially if this was an older man as well. He was in his 20s at that time. I just felt disappointed in myself for the first time. I had no one to blame. I couldn't say it was because I was a victim. I couldn't say it was because it was my dad. For the first time, I blamed myself, but that just emboldened me to actually go to the Navy and sign up and just focus on not pursuing men at all.
And then you met your husband.
And then I met my husband.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of this conversation with Jeannie. Today, we walk through her upbringing, the abuse she endured, the courage it took to report it, and the ripple effects within the family, and the continued challenges she faced in early adulthood. These are not easy stories to tell, and they're not easy stories to hear, but they matter. In part 2, we'll shift toward healing. We'll talk about faith, integration, the body's response to trauma, marriage, motherhood, and what it looks like to move from survival into something steadier, something more whole. If this episode resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And as always, thank you for being on the path. We'll see you in part 2.